Montana Territory, 1881. The snow had not yet melted from the mountain's shadow when Delia Thorne stepped off the freight wagon with her 2 children and nothing else to her name. Her boots hit the frozen dirt of Stillwater's main road like she was stepping into a sentence already halfway spoken, one she had not asked to be part of. Her fingers trembled as she held her daughter's hand tighter, the other arm wrapped around her son's small shoulders. Folks stared, but no one offered a word. She had heard it all before anyway. Your husband left you, took the stock, the cash, and the land title? Yes, ma'am, and said no man would ever want you again. He said more than that, she had whispered once, but never again. Now she stood in front of the livery, trying to focus on the sign instead of the chill biting through her threadbare coat. Her son Felix coughed, and her daughter Flora leaned close, whispering, "Mama, is this where we stay now?" "I do not know yet, baby," Delia said. "I will ask." The livery door opened before she could knock. A man stepped out, tall and dusted in trail mud, his hat low, jaw shadowed by days of beard. He had the look of someone used to wide silence and hard work. His eyes met hers, then dropped to the children. He paused, then tipped his hat. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. Delia straightened. "No, just looking for work or a room or both." He looked at her again, longer this time. "Name's Porter West. I run horses down from Red Lodge and keep a few stalls here in Stillwater. I do not have a room, but I have a barn with hay. Warm, clean. You and your little ones can rest there tonight." He nodded toward the barn behind the livery. "I will not charge you." Delia's pride flared, but her daughter was shivering. "Thank you. I am Delia Thorne. Flora and Felix are mine." Porter gave a quiet nod. "That much I figured." He walked them to the barn, lit a lantern, and laid down fresh hay near the warm wall where the horse's breath puffed in soft clouds. Delia settled her children, trying not to cry when Felix clung to the old quilt Porter handed her. "Are you running from something?" Porter asked once the children were asleep. "Not running," she said. "Just starting over." He crouched beside her. "Your husband, gone, took everything except the debt and the shame, told me I was used up. Said no man would want another man's leftovers." Porter's jaw tightened. "He lied." A silence passed between them, thick as the barn's shadows. "I need work," Delia said. "I need help with the stock," Porter said. "You know horses?" "I grew up breaking colts on my father's ranch in Texas." Porter gave a slow nod. "That'll do." The next morning, Delia rose before the sun. She mucked stalls, checked hooves, fed the geldings. Porter watched from the corner of the barn, arms folded. He did not hover, did not question. When she finished, he handed her a biscuit and a cup of coffee. "You work like someone with something to prove," he said. "I work like someone who has no choice," she replied. By the 3rd day, the children knew the names of all the horses. Flora followed Delia everywhere, and Felix helped Porter brush down a gray Mustang. Porter spoke little, but when he did, it was kind, steady. He never looked at Delia like she was broken. He looked at her like she had value still. One evening, after the children were asleep in the hayloft, Delia stepped outside to cool off. Porter was there, leaning against the fence, staring out toward the dark ridgeline. "You married?" she asked. "No," he glanced at her. "Never found someone who made me want to stay." Delia folded her arms. "You think I am ruined?" "No," he said simply. "I think you were married to a fool." The wind caught her hair. She turned her head, feeling the weight of his gaze. "You do not know me." "I know enough. I know you work hard. Love your young ones. You left a man who tried to break you and came out here to make something new. That is enough." Delia swallowed hard. "I do not know how to trust men anymore." "I am not asking you to," he said. "I am just here. If you need me." She stepped closer, not touching him, but near enough to feel the heat of him in the cold air. "Why are you kind to us?" Porter looked at her then, steady and sure. "Because no one else was, and because I want to be." Delia turned her face away, swallowing back tears. That night she lay awake in the hay, Flora curled against her side and her thoughts spinning like prairie wind. Her husband's words used to echo in her head, but now there was something else pressing in louder. He lied. Porter's voice, Porter's eyes, Porter's steady hands. By the end of the week, she was sleeping in a small room above the livery Porter had cleared out for her and the children. A cot, a stove, a wash basin. It was not much, but it was theirs. Felix laughed again. Flora sang to the horses. And Delia, for the first time in a long while, felt like she could breathe. One morning she found a small bundle by the stove. Inside it was a new pair of gloves, thick wool, and a note for colder mornings. Porter, she pressed the gloves to her chest. The next night she cooked stew and invited him up. They ate by lantern light while the children slept. She caught him watching her hands, her face, her eyes. She did not look away. "Why are you still here?" she whispered. "Because I want to be," he said, and she believed him. Late March settled into the valley with a hush, the sky clear and sharp as flint. Snowmelt ran down the hills in slow rivulets, soaking the earth behind the livery and turning the narrow trail to the river into soft muck. Delia worked with her sleeves rolled and her hair knotted up, the skin of her arms raw from wind and work. She'd begun to carry the scent of horses, hay, and wood smoke like a second skin. Porter had started letting her handle the green colts, the ones that spooked and turned on a pin if you moved wrong. He watched her from the fence or the stall door, but he didn't interfere. She liked that about him, his quiet trust. He never praised, never corrected, he just noticed. One morning, as she led a young chestnut in slow circles, she caught his voice behind her, low and steady. "You've got a way of settling them, like you're listening to something under the noise." She didn't turn. "You listen long enough, you start to hear what isn't said." He stepped beside her, close enough she felt the warmth of him even through the cold. "Folks don't always see that," he said. "What's beneath a person?" She nodded, eyes on the horse. "They see what they want to." When the colt paused, ears flicking back toward her, she reached up and laid a palm on his neck. The animal stilled. Porter shifted his weight. "There's a man in town, Wesley Harper. Runs cattle outside of Absaroki. He's looking for hands come roundup. Asked if I knew anyone steady." Delia kept her tone even. "Is he decent?" "He's rough, but not cruel. Pays fair. He don't hire women." Her jaw tightened. "But I told him I had someone better than any boy he'd bring on," Porter continued. "Told him if he didn't like it, he didn't need my horses this spring." Delia blinked. "You put your stock deal on the line." "I did." She turned to face him. "Why?" "Because I meant what I said." His voice was calm, but something flickered in his eyes. "He lied." She let the reins slip from her fingers and stepped back. The honesty in Porter's face burned hotter than the sun overhead. Her voice softened. "What if I fail?" "You won't." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. That evening, she sat with Flora mending the hem of one of Felix's shirts. The boy had taken to following Porter like a shadow, asking about saddles, bridles, and the names of the mountain peaks. Porter never brushed him off. He answered plain, patient, like every question mattered. "Mama," Flora said, threading a needle with careful fingers, "Mr. West's hands look like Daddy's used to, but he doesn't move like him." Delia looked up. "What do you mean?" "He's quiet when he walks. Like he's thinking about where he's going." Delia pressed her lips together. "That's a good thing, baby girl." She found Porter outside later, tightening a latch on the paddock gate. The sky was turning the color of old copper, and the wind carried the smell of thawing pine. "You ever leave this town?" she asked. "Sometimes, not far." "I go where the work is." "What made you stay here?" He ran his gloved thumb over the grain of the wood before answering. "I came through after the war, wasn't much left for me back east. Found a place where the land didn't ask questions." Delia crossed her arms. "You fight?" He nodded once. "Infantry, Appomattox was the end of it." They stood in silence a while, the kind that didn't press or pry. "Did you lose anyone?" she asked. "My brother, Cold Harbor." His voice was sanded down, but not empty. He was younger. Delia stepped beside him. "I lost my mother the winter after Flora was born. She never met Felix." Porter looked over, his brow softening. "That's a hard thing." Harder was not having time to grieve her, had to keep going, for the babies, for the land. "You did." She let her hands fall to her sides. "I didn't think I had anything left in me once he left. Thought I was dried up like a creek." Porter turned fully then, his gaze steady. "You're not." She didn't move. "You sure?" "I see how your children look at you. I see how the horses settle under your hands." "I've seen what ruin looks like, Delia. You're not it." Her throat tightened. "You speak like you've carried weight." "I have, and I know what it means to lay it down." The sun dipped just behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard. Delia didn't step away, neither did he. Later that night, after the children had gone quiet and the oil lamp was turned low, Delia sat at the small table upstairs and opened a worn ledger she'd found tucked behind a crate. Paper was scarce, but she began to sketch a plan: 1 acre behind the livery, maybe 2 milk cows, a few hens. A garden patch come May. She didn't know yet if Porter would want that kind of life, but the thought of it startled her less than it used to. She looked out the window, down toward the dark where the barn stood. A shape moved, slow and measured. Porter, checking the back gate again. Always watching, always steady. She didn't know what to call what was growing between them, but it had roots now. Strong ones. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe it might bloom. April brought the thaw in earnest. The river broke open first, ice cracking like gunfire through the valley, then the willows budded pale green. Mud clung to everything: boots, skirts, wagon wheels, but it meant the ground was waking up again, and that was something to hold on to. Delia stood behind the livery with a spade in one hand and her hem pinned up out of the muck, marking rows with the tip of her boot. Flora crouched nearby, poking holes into the soft soil, her small hands quick and careful. Felix had gone with Porter at first light to haul fence posts up from a distant pile. He'd insisted, and Porter had let him, tying the boy's scarf tighter before they left. "You think carrots will come up first?" Flora asked, brushing hair from her brow. "Or the beans?" "Carrots take their time," Delia said. "Beans will show quick, but they won't be strong unless they've got something to climb." Flora nodded, serious as any farmer. The sun was just past its peak when the wagon rolled in from the west. Wesley Harper stepped down, broad-shouldered and sun-scoured, with dust on his boots and a heavy jaw set firm. Delia wiped her hands on her apron and squared her shoulders. "You the one West vouched for?" Harper asked, squinting at her. "I am." He looked around, taking in the patch of earth, the child at her side, the worn knee of her skirt. "Ain't what I pictured." Delia didn't flinch. "You looking for someone who can break a horse or someone who fits your picture?" He gave a single nod, not quite approval, but not dismissal either. "Roundup starts 2 weeks out. You'll ride drag till I see what you've got." "I don't ride drag," she said evenly. "I ride point or flank." "I've done both." Harper studied her face a moment longer, then turned back to his rig. "Be ready." She watched him go, then turned back to her daughter. Flora didn't ask what drag meant. She just handed her mother another seed. That evening, Porter returned with Felix asleep against his shoulder. Mud streaked the boy's trousers and his knuckles were scraped, but he was smiling in his sleep. "Fence line's half done," Porter said, lifting Felix with the ease of habit. "Your boy's got grit." Delia brushed her fingers along Felix's cheek before taking him. "He wants to carry his weight." "He already does." They stood quiet a moment at the foot of the stairs. The air smelled of cedar and meltwater. "Harper came," Delia said. "I figured he would." He offered drag. Porter shifted his hat back. "You take it?" She shook her head. "No." "I told him what I was worth." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Good." She glanced at him. "You trust him?" "I don't trust many, but he won't cheat you. He just doesn't see what he hasn't been taught to notice." She nodded. "I can teach him." Later, after the children were tucked in and the kettle emptied, Delia stepped out back. Porter stood by the woodpile, splitting logs in the last of the twilight. She walked to him without speaking, took the stack he'd cut and carried it to the porch. When she returned, he was resting his axe against the stump. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes." "What keeps you?" "I like knowing what land I'm on, knowing whose voices I'll hear when I wake." She drew her shawl tighter. "I used to dream about running. Just riding till the road disappeared." "That what you want now?" She looked up at the stars, clear and countless. "I want to stop reaching for things that won't hold. I want my children to sleep without flinching. I want hands that know how to stay." Porter didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long but not empty. "I don't wander for the sake of it," he said at last. "I just never had reason to root down." She turned to look at him full. And now he met her eyes. "Now I do." Delia stepped forward, not all the way, but closer than she'd dared before. Her voice was quiet but sure. "I'm not asking for promises, just truth. You've had that from me since the start." "I know." She hesitated, then added, "I'm not used to it." "That'll change." She let the silence settle again. This time it felt like something being built, not something broken. Downstairs, Felix stirred in his sleep and a horse snorted in the paddock. Delia didn't move. Neither did Porter. The wind shifted, soft and cool, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to brace against it. Harper's roundup started under a wet sky and a wind that tested every stitch of Delia's coat. She rode out before light, leaving Flora with a widow named Mrs. Abernathy who lived above the mercantile and agreed to watch both children in exchange for firewood and mending. Flora had kissed her mother's cheek without complaint, and Felix, already saddled behind Porter, had simply nodded. He didn't ask when she'd be back. He trusted she would be. The herd was restless by the time Delia reached the holding pens west of the river. Harper gave her a glance and pointed his chin toward the flank, no words exchanged. She took her place without pause. The men said little, but they didn't crowd her either. By midday, she'd already cut 3 strays from the edge of the herd, her mare steady beneath her. The land rolled open in long, low hills, the grass not yet green, and her muscles ached from the cold. But the rhythm settled into her bones like something remembered, shifting the herd, watching for breakaways, keeping her mount responsive with the smallest shift of her weight. That evening, they camped on the east bank of the Stillwater. Porter arrived late, his horse lathered and his coat damp at the shoulders. He handed her a wrapped cloth from Mrs. Abernathy bread and a boiled egg and sat beside her near the fire. "You holding up?" he asked, his hands spread near the flame. "Not soft yet," she said, breaking the egg in half. He studied her a moment. "Harper says you ride clean, said he wouldn't mind keeping you on through branding." She didn't answer right away. The wind caught the edge of her scarf and she tucked it back behind her ear. "I didn't come to be tolerated," she said. "I came to be counted." Porter nodded once. "You are." She looked down at her hands. "Back in Texas, I worked like this and more, but it didn't matter. All anyone saw was who I belonged to. After he left, I figured maybe that was all I'd ever be." "You don't belong to anyone," Porter said. "Not unless you say so." She glanced at him, the firelight catching the quiet in his eyes. "And if I did," he didn't look away. "Then I'd say I'd be proud to be chosen." She didn't speak. Her heart was loud enough. The next morning, frost was thick on the saddle leather. The herd moved slow, their breath pluming in the air. Harper sent her ahead with 2 others to scout a crossing. The river ran high with snowmelt, and the rocks were slick underfoot. One of the younger men lost his footing on the far bank and twisted his ankle bad enough to limp. Delia doubled back and helped him mount, leading his horse across. The men watched her differently after that, not with surprise, but with the quiet calculation they reserved for anyone who could be trusted under strain. That night, she stood by the creek rinsing mud from her hands when Porter came up behind her, his steps careful on the damp earth. "I thought I knew what I wanted," he said, his voice low. "A quiet life, no ties, just work, land, and time." She turned toward him, drying her hands on her skirt. "And now, I want to build something with someone who's already built herself back up. Someone who's not afraid of the hard parts." Delia's throat tightened. "I'm not asking for an answer," he added. "I just wanted you to know." She stepped closer, the ground squelching softly beneath her boots. "When I left Texas, I didn't think I'd ever be looked at like I was worth more than a burden," she said. "But you see me clear, and I see you." He didn't move, didn't speak. "I'm tired of waiting for good things to vanish," she said. "I think I'm ready to stay." He reached out then, slowly, and took her hand. His fingers were rough, but his grip was gentle. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're the strongest thing I've ever seen." She didn't cry. She just stood there and let herself be held. The next day, Harper offered her a permanent place on his team. She thanked him, but said no. "I've got a better offer," she said, glancing toward Porter, who stood by the horses, his boots planted sure in the mud. Back in Stillwater, she found the patch of earth behind the livery already tilled deeper, the rows marked clean. The children ran to her when she stepped off the wagon. Felix clung to her waist like he was 5 again. Flora handed her a folded piece of paper, a drawing of their little home, with smoke rising from the chimney and a line of chickens in the yard. Delia knelt and kissed their cheeks. That night, with the stove warm and the shutters drawn tight against the wind, Porter sat across from her at the table. She reached over and laid her hand on his. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "You never were," he answered. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was full, and when the sun rose, it found them together, two people not mended but made new. The last frost passed quiet as a sigh, and with it came the first true warmth of spring. Pale shoots pushed up through the garden rows, and the hens Porter had bartered for 5 from a settler up near Nye scratched along the fence line behind the livery, pecking for grubs. Felix spent his mornings collecting eggs in a dented tin pail, and Flora coaxed green from every corner of dirt Delia let her touch. Delia stood with her hands sunk in soil, sleeves rolled to the elbows, watching the roots take. She hadn't expected to feel peace and stillness. But it grew on her, steady as the seeds they'd sown. Porter carried a feed sack over one shoulder, stopping beside her without a word. He set it down, dusted his palms against his trousers, and took in the rows. "You ever think you'd put down something like this?" he asked. "No," she said, brushing soil from her fingers. "I thought I'd be chasing after something for the rest of my life. Turns out I was just walking in the wrong direction." He watched her a long moment. "You ever miss Texas?" "I miss the sound of mockingbirds in the morning," she said. "But not enough to go back. I buried too much there." He looked toward the hills. "I've been thinking about building on the back acre. Room for 2 rooms and a porch, maybe more if we need it." She straightened, brushing her hands on her skirt. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to marry you, Delia, not because you need someone, and not because I do, but because I want to stand beside you, build something honest, raise your children like they're mine, and maybe, if it happens, raise one more." She didn't speak right away. Her heart beat heavy and slow, the way it did when rain moved in after a long, dry spell. "I never thought I'd be asked like that," she said. "I didn't think I'd be the asking kind," he said, voice quiet. She stepped toward him, close enough the scent of cut hay and saddle soap rose from his shirt. "You'll need to ask Flora," she said. "She's particular." He grinned, eyes soft. "I'll start with her, but I'm hoping her mother says yes first." She nodded once, slow. "Yes." He reached for her hand, tentative at first, then sure when she didn't pull away. They married the following Sunday in the clearing behind the livery. Mrs. Abernathy hemmed Delia's best dress, and Flora placed wild violets in her mother's braid. Felix stood beside Porter, his boots polished and his shirt tucked neat. The preacher from down in Absaroki rode up in a buggy and read from the Book of Ruth, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." The sun was high when they said their vows, and the wind smelled of pine and thawed earth. Porter kissed her like a man who meant to stay for the rest of his days. They built the house with their own hands, plank by plank. Delia laid the hearthstone herself, her palms raw by the end of it. Porter carved her a rocking chair from pine and gave it to her the day the front door went on. Flora took to sleeping in the new room with her books and her cat, and Felix helped dig a trench to drain water from the coop. They sat together each evening, Porter, Delia, and the children around a table Porter had built from old barn oak. They ate beans from their garden, bread baked in their own stove, and smoked trout from the river. One summer Sunday, while Porter and Felix mended the barn roof and Flora strung beans to dry, Delia sat on the porch, hands on her stomach, feeling the flutter she hadn't felt in years. She didn't cry. She just smiled and rested her hand there, full of the quiet certainty that this life, this home, had room enough. No one asked her to prove herself anymore. She had done that 100 times over. Now there was only the daily work, the warmth of love returned, and the rhythm of a life built slow and true. Years passed. The valley deepened in color each season. The boy grew tall. The girl learned to sew and read maps. The baby born in early autumn came quick and red-faced, and Porter held him with the care of a man who had waited his whole life to be needed like this. They named him Caleb. On evenings when the sky turned gold and the wind settled soft across the fields, Delia would sit with Porter on the porch, her hand in his, watching the children run barefoot through the grass. "I never thought I'd get this," she said once. Porter kissed her knuckles. "You earned it." They never left Stillwater. They had no need to. Everything they'd ever longed for had taken root right there in the shadow of the mountains, and it grew, and it held, and it stayed.